Welcome back to the Capital Confidential podcast from the Times-Union and the Hearst Corporation. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capital Confidential newsletter. 10 years ago, two men in the North Country did the unthinkable. Richard Matt and David Sweat escaped Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora and were on the run for about 3 weeks before one was killed and the other was captured. What followed was an extensive report from the State Inspector General's office, which combed over everything that led to the escape. We're joined this week by Inspector General Lucy Lang, who took office about 5 years after that report came out, but has continued to keep a close eye on the state's prison system. IG, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
We are in the most beautiful office that I've ever been in Albany, where you can oversee, I won't tell everybody exactly where you are, but you can see the Capitol, you can see the Egg. It's amazing. I think that you should sell tickets to come here.
I feel very lucky to have this remarkable view, but the awesomest thing about it is that looking out at the Capitol and at the plaza really reminds one of the gravitas of a job like this. And I feel lucky to have that reminder every time I walk in here and look out, but especially on a day like today where we can see so far into the distance. Not to overplay my job, because I think your job is much more important than my job. But I actually take the same view when I look at the plaza and look at the Capitol. I always think this is where the power is, but it extends so far beyond, and we can never forget that, I think. When I was a prosecutor, I would often take the train one extra stop, so I was forced to walk back past all the courthouses on my way to the district attorney's office, because I really believe that as public servants, we can never lose sight of the impact that our job has and of the people we're serving. And so the buildings serve as one reminder of that for me.
I love that. So turning to a much more serious subject, it's been 10 years since that prison escape. And I remember at the time I was working on a television show called Capital Tonight, now hosted by Susan Arbetter. She's wonderful. She's amazing. And I remember this being such a daily interest, but also I would say there was so much fear around it because we didn't know where these two men were. And I wasn't able to attend the panel that you did on this recently, but I watched it in post. I didn't realize that they kept expanding the search zone by 5 miles every day. And knowing that it was 3 weeks before they caught them, oh my goodness. And when I think about events like this, maybe you're the same way, I always think of one thing that really stuck out to me and surprises me still to this day. I'm wondering if you have one of those.
What I remember from the time when I was based wholly in New York City was the sense of fear and anxiety that was much more concentrated in upstate and in the North Country. But I do remember that generalized anxiety. But what I really took away from the conversation that we had last week, acknowledging the 10th anniversary of the escape, in which we brought together for the first time the leadership who were on the ground running the search and the investigation, and they had a really remarkable conversation, was that to a person, the leadership felt that New Yorkers had really risen to the occasion. And hearing stories from the former superintendent of state police about how much the residents of the North Country rallied around the troopers who were working round the clock to try to track down the two men who had escaped, and how New Yorkers were handing out water, giving out haircuts, providing food, helping find sleeping accommodations in an area where that's not necessarily totally available, was so awesome. And just a really great reflection of how New Yorkers step up.
That's such a good observation, too. It was really one of those unity moments, where people are... there was nobody who was like, let's let these guys go. Like everybody was like, we need to catch these people and support the police to catch them as much as possible.
That's right. And we can hold both the idea that we need transformative change in our state prison system and also the idea that two dangerous people need to be identified and brought back in a situation like that.
The IG's office put out this huge report that I mentioned at the top, the 150-page report from the former IG. And I hadn't read it. before. I was combing through it over the past couple of days preparing to talk to you, and I did not realize how detailed it was. Can you, not to make this boring, but can you take me through like what that looks like from an IG's perspective? Like how do you go about doing that kind of investigation and report?
I love the idea of not making it boring. I couldn't make it boring if I tried. The remarkable staff in this office, who I was fortunate to inherit, conducted hundreds and hundreds of interviews. They reviewed countless pieces of documentary evidence. They collected forensic evidence. They were in real time working to figure out not just how the incarcerated men had escaped, but what the gaps were in protocol that allowed it to happen. And it was a kind of perfect storm of set of systemic failures that enabled them to get out and to remain unapprehended for as long as they did.
Maybe this is probably in the report and I just don't know the answer. How were they able to get out of their cell without people hearing them, carving these holes and doing all of that?
You know, one of the notable things I find about visiting secure facilities is the amount of noise sort of all the time. They were able to saw through the walls and then sneak out by putting a dummy in one of the beds so that guards who were theoretically doing a bed check were duped. Of course, one of the wild pieces about this is that the guard who was who believed that the dummy was in fact one of the soon-to-be escapees had previously been duped by a dummy some years earlier. So, you know, but it wasn't that alone. Of course, the fact that they were able to get the tools to get through their wall and then to get through the pipe, the fact that which came in through a compromised civilian staff member of the prison, and she was only able to get them in because of the deficiencies in checks at the gate, and then of course the incarcerated folks were able to get the things back from the tailor shop where she did the handoff back to their cells because they were also violating protocol thanks to a corrections officer who was allowing them to walk around metal detectors and to avoid searches. So it was at sort of every possible place where an internal control should have kicked in to stop this from happening, there was no internal control.
So in the report, there were recommendations to correct for those internal control failures. And it had to do with a lot of things, like from some safety checks at the front gate to, nightly bed checks, things like that. In your role as IG, you've looked at docs. Do you have a sense of how far we've come from the escape, I guess?
There are now many more mechanisms in place to prevent the kind of individual discretion that allowed for the violation of those safety and security protocols.
That's good. I mean, nobody wants more people to escape from prison and be on the run, I would assume. It's such a complicated area, I think, because you look at this prison escape, and I think at the time, I don't know when the last one happened before that. Do you?
Not offhand, but there had not been an escape from Clinton itself in 100 years, right. And it was considered to be an inescapable facility.
Are those security protections that you're talking about, are they as strong at every prison as they are at Clinton, you think, or does it vary individually?
It really should not vary by facility. There, of course, whether it is a maximum or medium security facility, there are different protocols in place, but it should not be up to the discretion of individual leadership to whether or not to follow the rules. And part of what we do now is work with docs to make sure that that kind of thing is not happening.
Can we go back? I just want to go back to the police for a second who were on the hunt and talk a little bit about how they were able to I don't want to say surround these guys, but how are they able to track them down? I just find it so impressive because if you have not been to the North Country and you don't know the kind of terrain that they're working with out there, it is it's a place where you could very easily disappear into and very easily hide. And when they did, I mean, we were 3 weeks in when when the first was killed and then the second was captured. And at that point, I think some people, including myself, had internally been thinking, these guys are already across the border to Canada.
And ultimately, the surviving escapee was within a mile or two of the border.
Yeah.
And it came very, very close to crossing the border.
Do you think that anything with that police response should have been different, I guess? I don't know, because I don't know how police work.
This was a very impressive operation by state police working in collaboration with local, federal, and even Canadian law enforcement to execute this search. And they were gathering evidence as they went. And ultimately, they identified a cabin that the men had stayed in and were able to gather forensic evidence from there. So that enabled them to draw a smaller circle. And as you know, they continued to expand the circle based on how far they thought the men could walk in the course of a day.
How does this compare to, other prison incidents we've seen? I guess the question is, the prison system in New York keeps on advancing, like so much over the years in what some would say good ways, some would say bad ways. But I mean more of like, we've come from Attica to now. Where do you see that trajectory going as IG? Because you look at docks a lot, you look at prisons a lot. Where's the room for improvement, I guess, in terms of that capability to do their jobs?
I have visited every prison in New York State and spoken to incarcerated folks and corrections officers and staff and leadership at all of the facilities. And I stand by the idea that the best thing we can do for public safety is to provide programming and educational and vocational opportunities to incarcerated New Yorkers. We know that the vast majority of folks who are in prison in New York State, although this was not true for the two men who escaped from Clinton, will be coming home to our communities.
Right.
And we owe folks who are incarcerated, as well as our communities, the commitment to putting people in a better position than they were in when they went away. And that's something that has tremendous room for growth.
And I think it gets missed that it has tremendous value. I think a lot of people, when they look at the prison system, may see people who have done something wrong and who they don't want to see succeed. They want to see them punished, basically. And I think what gets missed by those people is the value of rehabilitation and the value of when they come out of the system, how to reintegrate into society and be really successful. Because as I frequently say, a rising tide lifts all ships, I think.
And it's not just about the skills and education that are provided. It is also that education is a pro-social activity.
Yeah.
Being in a classroom and having to thoughtfully disagree with people, having to defer to a teacher, doing the reading to prepare, all of these things are buy-in to a pro-social system. And what we want is for people who come home to reintegrate successfully. There is a study that says that the single biggest predictor of someone not going back to prison is having taken even one college class during the course of their time in prison. And, that seems to me like a much cheaper way to succeed as a system than by other alternatives that have been tried, like extending sentences.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but every year you obviously get complaints around state agencies, and docks is number one, right?
Every year.
So let's get into that. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Schoharie County Sheriff's Office and New York State Police Patrols responded to a motor vehicle crash at the intersection of State Route 30 and State Route 30A in the town of Schoharie.
The limo crash that killed 20 people in upstate New York on October 6, 2018 is one of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in U.S. history.
The thing should have never been on the road to begin with.
How the hell did this happen?
The owner of the limousine company was a former FBI informant.
Well, this was certainly one of the most egregious cases of intentional disregard for human life.
It's a story of tragedy and loss, of negligence and consequence. But more than anything else, it's a story of catastrophic failure.
We just want the truth to come out.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bringing you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
And we are back on the Capitol Confidential podcast with Inspector General Lucy Lang. So these complaints, docs is a very big thing, right? You look at workers' compensation, you look at complaints. Well, you tell me, what are these complaints about? What are the various categories that somebody could write to the IG's office and say, hey, you need to take a look at this at docs?
Well, as you know, more than half of our complaints annually come in related to the Department of Corrections, notwithstanding the fact that we have oversight of more than 100 other state executive agencies and serve as the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General's office and as the Welfare Inspector General. So we have a very big portfolio, and yet docs does seem to be the number one kind of leading concern amongst folks who reach out to our office. And those complaints fall into any number of buckets. I mean, some of them are things that are not within our purview, and they are things large and small. You know, they range from allegations of massive corruption to I only got one slice of bread at dinner and I am supposed to get two. And we review every complaint.
Yeah. What do you do with the complaints that aren't in your jurisdiction? Do you pass them off to somebody that it might be in their jurisdiction, or?
Yes, DOCS has an internal office called the Office of Special Investigations, and there are any number of complaints that come in that are better handled on an internal level. And as is the case with many other agencies about whom we receive complaints, things like basic HR are not within our purview. We are really looking for fraud and misconduct, for systemic deficiencies.
And you're not the office that would, let's say, we've had these awful incidents of people being beaten to death in prisons, incarcerated people. That would not be your office investigating that.
We don't investigate a murder in custody per se, but we do serve in support roles and look for areas where there may be gaps or problems. And for example, after the tragic murder of Robert Brooks, we did take a look at what happened with respect to the body-worn cameras. And we made a recommendation to the Department of Criminal Justice Services that they promulgate an updated policy around body-worn cameras, which many of our jurisdictional agencies use beyond DOCS. And of course, law enforcement across the state locally use body-worn cameras as well. And DCJS has updated that policy and promulgated that policy, I believe, as of last week. So that's the kind of thing that we look at when we see a major incident like that. Is not the we don't handle the investigation into the murder itself, but we look at the existing circumstances that may have allowed something to happen.
Right, those systemic issues or those steps along the way that could have prevented that death that aren't necessarily criminal actions.
That's right.
Or could be criminal actions. Yeah. Do you ever work with the Commission of Correction? Is that do you at all work with them? There's been a lot of talk about that commission and it's kind of what it does. And for some people, it's kind of unclear what it does. It's an oversight entity that may be expanded through new legislation that we won't get into because the governor has not signed it and we don't know if that's going to happen. So, but do you ever work with them, I guess?
We do. We have a working relationship with the Commission on Corrections. Their mandate in some ways is broader than ours. And of course, they have jurisdiction over local facilities as well. And we really have virtually nothing to do with local jails, including even a complex as large as Rikers Island.
So we've talked a lot about prisons, and I want to be clear, you do so much work with docks and prisons, but you also do a lot of other work. What are you focused on right now? Not focused, because I would imagine your attention is divided into several different areas. But tell me about what you're excited about right now, or maybe not even excited. I don't know if that's a good word for it, but what you're passionate about right now.
Well, because it's on my mind, even though it is on docs, just yesterday out of the Brooklyn DA's office, there was an indictment of a corrections officer who was abusing the workers' compensation law. And this is a problem that we have seen across the department, that some facilities are massively understaffed. As many as 40% of corrections officers may be out on workers' compensation leave. And our view is that is partially because there are very favorable provisions that allow people to collect extensively while they're out on workers' compensation. And of course, there are very challenging conditions that people work in, and it becomes a self-fulfilling promulgating problem, because if someone goes out on comp, then someone else has to work double or triple shifts, and then that person wants to go out on comp, and then there are not the kind of checks in place in docs based on the contract that other comparable agencies have. For example, a stay-at-home order so that you can check and make sure that someone isn't, say, working on the side. Requirements for an independent medical examination so that false claims of injury on the job get vetted out. So all of those are areas where there's tremendous room for improvement to curtail the misuse of workers' compensation benefits in the State Department of Corrections. So I am pleased that case is pending, and that there's an officer who's being held accountable for having been out on workers' compensation leave for like 9 of her 10 years in corrections and running a side business at the same time, which is really just an outrage and an abuse of taxpayer dollars.
Is that a new trend of abusing this workers' compensation in the correction system, or has that historically been the case? Do you know? I know that you're obviously only looked at a few years because you've been here since 2021, but is this something that people might have been getting away with and now not?
Our sense is that it's been a longstanding problem, and we have been investigating it for many years, but because there aren't the fail-safes in place that I described, they're very difficult to investigate.
So what else besides docs? Anything else that is on your mind that is in the IG's world?
One thing I'm really interested in right now is helping educate the public about the role of oversight in government more broadly.
I love that.
It is so critical that people understand that there are entire agencies like mine, like my colleagues in New York City who run the Department of Investigations, like ombudsman programs, even at the State Department of Aging, who are checking to ensure that the checks and balances work, and that we serve the public, and that when the public identifies a deficiency, there's a place to direct it, and those complaints will be taken seriously and investigated. So, as always, I encourage New Yorkers who suspect fraud or corruption in state government to reach out to us at 1-800-DO-RIGHT, and to follow us on social media at New York State IG.
And I should say for our listeners that don't know that you are an independent person. You're an independent office. So while you are in, I think, the executive branch of government, you investigate the executive branch of government. So we're not talking about some like an internal control, something like that. And I think that adds a lot of integrity to what your office does. And I think that integrity hopefully helps build trust with the public in government.
Yes. And although appointed by the governor, I can't be removed by the governor.
Right.
And that gives us the freedom to investigate the commissioners who the governor has put in place in all the executive agencies, should there be a need for investigation. And that independence is really critically important. And you'll recall that when we saw 17 federal inspectors general fired on a Friday night by President Trump, that it really shook the oversight world, because those historically, unlike, say, United States attorneys who do turn over with presidential administrations, historically, inspectors general have been independent from the White House.
What do you think that says about the firing of them? Is that like, does that worry you, I guess?
Very much so. The politicization of watchdogs is very dangerous to democracy, because really since the revolution, in various forms, inspectors general have helped identify systemic problems, create and develop procedures, investigate allegations of corruption, and that is a kind of largely unknown and uncelebrated function, but an absolutely vital one to making democracy work for the people.
Absolutely. All right, well, we will leave it there because we have talked about a lot and we could talk for another hour. But IG Lucy Lang, thank you for coming on the pod.
Absolutely, but I can't leave it there because listeners should know that Dan and I are sitting together, each holding a microphone, and I was instructed to hold it as though I was doing karaoke. So I think that gives me the right to ask Dan what your go-to karaoke song is.
That is such a good question. I have so many of them. Right now, it's Creep by Radiohead.
Okay.
Before that, it was Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, that song by Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons.
Beautiful.
And then before that, it was Valerie by Amy Winehouse.
Very good. All great choices.
How about you?
You know, I gotta say that I really love Madonna. So "Living on a Prayer" is there are just so many great Madonna tunes that we could go to. I also love Me and Bobby McGee, and now that my soprano voice is not what it once was, it really hit those low notes when I do Janis Joplin.
There you go. That's great. An advantage for you.
Absolutely.
All right. To our listeners, if you want to learn more about state government, you can head to our website at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. Thanks as always to the Hearst Corporation and the Times-Union for taking a chance on us. Our theme music for now is Easy Hike by DM. Our editor is Jessica Marshall. We'll see you next time. Be well.